All right. Do you turn your videos on for everybody? Hi, Andrea. Welcome. And there's another person coming in. Okay. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Lawrence Loh. And he is the music director of Symphoria in Syracuse. He's also the music director of West Virginia Symphony. And he's held positions with the Pittsburgh Symphony, the Northeastern Pennsylvania Philharmonic, Syracuse Opera, Pittsburgh Youth Symphony, and he regularly conducts the Dallas Symphony, Colorado Symphony, as well as orchestras in Malaysia and South Korea. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest conductor for our 2120 session, The Art of Conducting. So I'll lead Lawrence through, Larry through some questions, but please don't be shy at any point. If you have questions, either raise your hand or use the raise your hand function. And then at a certain point, I will also get to, because he's very interested in looking at your Ithaca Symphony program. So I may share that program and then have you talk about a particular program. Maybe have pick, right now, think about one or two programs from that set of concerts that you've designed that you want to sort of talk to, and maybe Larry will program them with Symphoria, or if he really, yeah. All right. So Larry, I'm so happy to have this chance to spend time with you and pick your brain a little bit and have you share your insight and wisdom about the conducting profession and the field of orchestra in general. So one of the things I'm always talking to students about is many times our students feel like there is kind of one route to being a professional musician, rather than sort of, so it's either engineering or violinist in an orchestra. So I'm really curious about your training, your through Yale and Indiana and Rochester, University of Rochester. And I would love to have you talk about your experience of how you became a conductor and the training you went through and the path you've chosen, why you've chosen this path. Because I think for, and I'm talking too much, so I'm going to shut myself off pretty soon. But especially for Asian Americans, we don't see a lot of people in position of leadership. A lot of times, we see plenty of musicians in the orchestra, in the rank and file membership musicians, but it's more unusual to see a music director who is an Asian American in a leadership position. So please talk to us about your training and how your path led to where you are.
Well, that's an interesting observation, just because I hadn't really thought of it that much, even though it's totally true what you're saying. I always think about, well, there aren't enough women music directors or people of color in positions, although both of those are changing. They're definitely the minority in terms of the proportion. And so for me, it wasn't, when I was growing up in Pennsylvania, my mom played in the Harrisburg Symphony. And yes, she was one of the many Asian violinists in that orchestra. And my dad was a doctor. And I was clarinet and piano were my instruments. Very serious musician, but I didn't think that I would be going into music at all as a profession. I just didn't. Conducting wasn't even on the radar at all. And then, getting a position with an orchestra, I just know how hard it is. I know how much of a struggle it was for my mom. I know about the brutal schedule, but I also knew how much she loved doing it. And I would go to the concerts all the time. I just loved it. But I just didn't have that in my head as something I was going to do. And then I went to the University of Rochester so I could continue studying clarinet at Eastman, and was pre-med. So I kind of did, like, I guess what you would say, like either go like be a violinist in the orchestra or become an engineer. And I'm sure your orchestra is filled with like people who are just
90%
all sorts of things
that
are not music, and you have that connection. And my son, he's a senior in high school. He's looking at places just like where you all are, because it's that great youth orchestra experience that he had. He was in the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony, plays in the Youth Symphony here. He did Interlochen, NYO. So he has this whole culture of excellence, but not as his profession. Mm-hmm. And so he's kind of looking at schools like Cornell, where you have an orchestra that's kind of like the orchestras that he plays in already,
Mhm.
um, and with diverse interests. But back to like my path, when I went to Rochester, I decided that I wanted to go into music my junior year. And because I was at a liberal arts school, the liberal arts part of Rochester, I was able to get this BA music degree. I had enough credits to get this management studies, like a pre-MBA kind of degree. Uh, and then I took conducting my senior year as an elective. I didn't know what I wanted to do in music. I just thought I'll just get this and then do that in graduate school, which is what a lot of people end up doing. And when I took conducting my senior year, I felt like that was just this perfect synthesis of what I liked about music theory, which was my forte, and also working with people. So I liked analyzing the music, but I also like bringing it to life, which is something that if you're just doing music theory, I think it's a little more isolating, a little removed from the music making part of it. And it got really esoteric towards the end because I was taking some graduate theory classes my senior year and taking conducting at the same time, and which one was more relatable to my mind. And it was clearly it was interacting with other people. And so then I went to a program at Indiana for my master's, started a doctorate there, then transferred to Yale, got an artist diploma there. So in total, it was actually 6 years after undergraduate that I spent, which is not uncommon. I don't know how many years you spent, Chris, in graduate school, but a lot of people who go into music will end up just staying in programs because it's it's like the safe haven. You really feel like you're in this amazing artistic bubble, and you're learning so much and you're meeting so many people. I did Aspen too in the summers, and it was just this incredible vibrant community I didn't want to leave. So I just kept getting more and more degrees. And then I got my first job um, with the Colorado Symphony, but I'd had some good success in auditions for conducting positions uh, with Minnesota Orchestra, where I was the like a finalist, and New York Youth Symphony in Manhattan. And so then when I got the Colorado Symphony job, it was definitely that big foot in the professional world. And then it never ended. Like it was always like climbing a ladder, and it's still that way now. But that's a really long, continuous story. So my path was definitely not direct. Conducting was never on my radar, and I literally did the go to undergraduate to explore what you might want to do thing, and was lucky to be in a place where I could find a lot of those areas to explore.
Yeah, I think it's for me. I actually couldn't afford to go to grad school, so I just started working, and then in fact, I almost went to University of Minnesota, not knowing how I would pay for it. But then Murray Sidlin left the program, and then called me in July
Right.
after I had signed the lease that I already had an apartment in Minnesota,
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
in July I started looking for a job, and then John Painter, who was my mentor, I said, well, a friend of mine is retiring in Quincy. And so I went to this school district and taught for 2 years, which in a lot of ways changed my career trajectory, because I realized I love teaching. So I was kind of, the magnet was towards the teaching route rather than the conducting route. But it's absolutely true what you say about graduate schools, especially a healthy program where there's so many great artists in faculty, and your student colleagues who are such great musicians. It's sort of this haven where you really don't want to leave it, because there's so much um, to gather and learn from in that sort of protective environment. And I think it's both a pro and con, right? Because
Oh,
on
for
one
sure.
hand, it's a really nurturing space where you really have room to grow. Because once you're out in the professional world, then you are on the chopping block every day. And so, I mean, so after my master's at Michigan, I got a position as the assistant in Louisiana Philharmonic, and
Well, it's great. You got a job. I mean, that's what
Well,
everyone wants to do. They go to
but
grad school and then they try to get a job.
so I want to ask you about your experience at Colorado, where because my experience at LPO was that they were not interested in nurturing or sort of curating this young musician to grow. Right? They just wanted somebody to come in, do the job, get it done, and then that's what they're interested in. So they threw 60 services at me, meaning 60 concerts for an
Rehearsals or
assistant conductor.
concerts. Okay.
Yeah, it was just ridiculous because the music director was, he was a chief conductor of the Frankfurt
Was it
Opera.
Klaus or was it Zeibel?
Yeah, Klaus Peter.
Yeah.
So he was a great musician. Everybody loved him.
Yeah.
I loved him, but he was only in town for 12 weeks out of a 36-week season. So anything that didn't make money, like park concerts, young people's concerts, they even gave me a chamber orchestra run out, which was like, what? So, but they just threw things at me. And so as long as I didn't fall on my face, they're like, okay, he survived it. So let's give him another one. And it was
Right.
that kind of situation. So,
But you should, I'm sure that your students know that the structure of the Louisiana Philharmonic is not like other orchestras. It's a cooperative orchestra.
right.
So when you're standing up in front of these musicians, they're all your boss. And it's a very different dynamic than like when I go to, so my last assistant position was with Pittsburgh Symphony. It's a phenomenal orchestra. And there's a music director, and I was a resident conductor. And so when I got up there, whenever it was my turn to be up there, I was empowered to be in charge of that. And I didn't have 60 concerts a year. It was more like maybe 30. In Colorado, actually, I had about 50 a year. There's a certain sweet spot in the size of orchestra where they don't want to spend on all those guest conductors and they throw everything at the assistant conductor.
Yeah.
And Colorado is one of those. Pittsburgh is not. We would have a lot of different people come in and do things, and then the resident and assistant conductors would do their own things. But it was definitely, in that situation, if you were up there, it was your time and you're the one who's supposed to they don't want you to waste any time. They don't want incompetence, but they also want you to make them sound good. And it's just, I know, because the thing is, like, Colorado is also co-op, but it just doesn't function like one, like Louisiana. And the orchestra I conduct in Syracuse is modeled after Louisiana Philharmonic, but because I'm the music director, I don't run into that. But I'm sure that when we have assistant conductors, when we've had them, or people who just do the young people's concerts, that dynamic slips back into it.
Right.
It's a little less nurturing. It's a little more frustrating for the conductor. And so, contrary to your experience with Louisiana, my music director was Maren Alsop, who's with Baltimore Symphony. And she's one of the most nurturing people just in the whole music world. And so when she took a chance on this totally green conductor who looked much younger than he was, I mean, I was 28, but I looked like 21. and so the orchestra thought I was like this wunderkind 21-year-old. And because she was such an advocate for me, I remember having just that first year, although it was definitely sink or swim, I think they cut me slack because I just looked like I should be in high school, and so there was a little bit of that dynamic. And also I had a lot of support from Maren. And that really helped because she just kind of set the tone for that dynamic. She was around for some of my concerts. And so the orchestra couldn't be as jerky as I think they could be. So anyway.
Yeah. I think, what often instrumentalists don't realize is that, if you're a violinist in a professional orchestra, then you've been playing and practicing and crafting your skills as a violinist since you were maybe 4 or 5, right? So that's at least 20 years of experience that you're sort of contending with, right? Whereas conductors, when we get up in front of a professional orchestra, more likely we have less than like maybe 3-4 years under our belt. So, I mean, just imagine a violinist stepping in front of an orchestra as a soloist after just 4 or 5 years of, I mean, that would be ridiculous.
And we can't practice.
Exactly. Right.
We can't practice. Like, this, right? I mean, you think you're going to know how to conduct something and you're maybe, in your room or whatever, and you're making the moves, and maybe you're standing in front of a mirror or you videotape yourself and you think you look pretty good, and then when you get in front of an actual person and they don't respond the way that you think they're going to respond, it's very disorienting, and there's no way to prepare yourself for that because you are learning in front of other people.
Yeah.
Like your lab is the time when, you know, everyone will expect the world from you, and so it makes it hard. And that's probably why, like, a lot of conductors do end up, if they can, staying in school, because you could be the cool student that's just learning and you're allowed to make mistakes, and as soon as you have a job, if you make a mistake, you're cooked. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Your career is over. And I can remember every mistake I made, you know, like they stay with you. So I think it's I just I think it's one of those weird professions because you can't get better without doing it in front of other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember um, the piece that I was worried about that first season with LPO was Bruckner 7 because it was such a massive piece. So I just looked at the season rep and I said, well, I know I'm gonna cover that week, so I better study that piece. So I spent like the
Yeah.
entire July just on Bruckner 7. And so
That's awesome.
I'm studying and studying, and I'm like, I don't understand this. I don't like Bruckner. What is happening? I don't understand how to do this phrase. And then, so the season starts, and then, of course, you know, Bruckner was scheduled in October. So I've been looking at it all through the summer and through the October, and then of course the first rehearsal of the Bruckner week, I get a call from the operations manager. Okay, Klaus Peter missed his plane. You're up for the first read through. I'm like, what? Are you ready? Okay. So
Yeah, but you were ready. That's good.
I was ready, but like I went through the whole thing. I said to the orchestra, I will probably make a lot of mistakes. But here we are, and so we went through the whole thing. I didn't stop. I just went through entire symphony, and then Klaus Peter gave us permission to videotape that session. And then, of course, he arrived later that evening, and then the next day he's going through it. And I'm looking at him conducting, and I realize I have made every possible decision in an opposite way. Like I did it in
Yeah.
2, he did it in 4, and I did it in 4, he does it in 2, so on down the line. And so then after the first movement, he kind of looks back at me, come here. So I go, like, so has anybody talked about this piece with you? He's like, no. Okay, we're gonna have a discussion. So it actually became a catalyst for him giving me lessons every week on the rep I'm supposed to
Oh,
cover.
that's
So
good.
it became a really positive thing. And then on top of that, the orchestra sort of realized, well, you know, he got through it, so that's something.
Yeah. No, it's probably good for them in terms of their confidence in you that
Right.
you could just take them through it without stopping, because you know the orchestra is going to watch for any, you know, at every transition they're going to look up and, you know, what's he going to do? Is he going to do that in 2, in 4? What's the tempo going to be? How's he doing that cutoff? And there's I'm sure that because you were able to successfully get them through, that was all good.
Yeah, and it
Helped
was
your
sort of
relationship.
that was the point at which the orchestra started to assign more things to me because they realized he can get through it. So they knew it wouldn't be a sort of a disaster if I was conducting a park concert or something. Yeah.
Hmm. Good.
Uh, okay, so let's switch gears a little bit because this time we're in, this year of 2020. Um, uh, so many things are
Yeah.
happening, but the pandemic and you know the Cornell Orchestra is responding with the speaker series, as I've said. But how are you responding with your 2 orchestra, with Symphoria and West Virginia?
So there are two different orchestras with roughly the same budget. So it's just allocated differently. So in West Virginia, it's a typical, I would say, medium-sized per service orchestra, kind of the same size as like Spokane or Portland, Maine, or Knoxville.
Mhm.
Musicians come from Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, that region,
Mhm.
DC. So it's a really high level per service orchestra.
Mhm.
So the musicians are paid every time they come, and then we give them a hotel room and we pay for their mileage. We don't give them like health insurance. And so we're one of several gigs probably that they have. And so because of the nature of the orchestra, the type of musician we get, extremely good at reading music and plays at a really high level. Um, but they're not on salary. So every time we use them, we have like a master agreement with the musicians that's kind of complicated because like right now we can't honor the master agreement. Like we can't hire the entire orchestra 10 times a year
Right.
because
Right.
we can't put them together on a stage
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
same room.
Yeah.
West Virginia actually has a bigger restriction on the number of people indoors
Mm.
than New York State for some reason.
Mm.
Um, and I know Cornell has its own restrictions, but like
Yeah.
we're allowed to have 50 people in
Wow.
Syracuse indoors, and in West Virginia, I think it's 22.
Right.
So we just came to an agreement with the musicians to put together concerts with 22 or fewer people, and we're paying them a certain percentage of the entire salary that they would get if they played the entire year.
Hmm.
And so we can kind of pick and choose then for the rest of the season. And we're doing our first concert next week, and it's like all strings basically with a
Right.
piano concerto.
Yeah.
So we have uh, the Elgar String Serenade. We have the George Walker Lyric for
Lyric for
Strings,
strings. Yeah.
and then we have the quintet version of the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto
Hmm.
with pianist Orion Weiss. And then I kind of adapted it. I added the bass part, made certain parts solo, made it for small orchestra, small
Hmm.
string group. Um, and so, from then on, we had stuff like I think Shostakovich 5 was on this year. Uh, we had a commission for like 80 musician orchestra, West Virginia composer. There was just a lot on this orchestra. Like we closed my first season with Copeland 3.
Yeah.
That's the kind of typical piece that
Right.
we would do,
Yeah.
and Verdi Requiem. And so now we're doing these little concerts, and
Hmm.
everyone is socially distanced or
Hmm.
physically distanced, better word. And they are going to be just all spread out on the stage. And I just did a concert with Buffalo, and they do the same thing where everyone is simply 6 to 12 feet apart,
Hmm.
depending on what
Hmm.
instrument they play. And in Syracuse, we're doing this experiment. I don't know, like I'm pretty sure it's okay. We've done a lot. We've done like a month and a half of concerts every week because that orchestra is on salary. So we can do literally anything with our group of 50 musicians, which are on salary. And so there's no problem with suddenly just doing like this week we're going to have a concert that features Beethoven septet, and that's going to be I'm not conducting it. It's the bulk of the middle of the program, and we're going to pre-record it and live stream it. And in West Virginia also it's live streamed. Everything will, no audience. Um, but Syracuse was we had more flexibility, and we were able to do the entire season so far because they're on salary and because the musicians are so involved because it's a co-op. So like a typical example of the kinds of adjustments we made to this season would be, I think first we eliminated rentals almost across the board, with the exception of I know you all got to meet Jessie Montgomery. We did her banner piece to open our season, which is a really great, really, really amazing piece and was really poignant and just perfect for the occasion. We actually did it after doing the national anthem, one after the other, and I talked about it. And I think it was a really poignant way to begin the season. Um, but we just had like a regular season full of rentals, and we just had to reduce those costs because we don't know what's going to happen. And in terms of what we're doing in terms of distancing, we have these plexiglass, well, they're actually vinyl, like marine vinyl sheets that are suspended. And so everyone is in these transparent office cubicles, and they're a little less than 6 feet apart, including that, but that also includes winds and brass. So everyone is kind of sitting apart. Um, and I'm sure it's not as safe as just simply being really far apart, but we're all getting tested, and we're just kind of if you leave the state, you have to be quarantined, and we're just doing the best we can because I think that the biggest challenge for orchestras now during this time is that people forget about us. and then forget that it's like a thing that they want, or maybe they'll learn to live without us, or learn to like, oh, YouTube is just as good, just to watch a performance on YouTube. So that's why, like in both orchestras, one of the things that's making it, um, I think, special is that it's live. So when we're playing, people, with the exception of like the Beethoven septet we're pre-recording because it's too big a reset for the stage. When people sign in and they subscribe to it, they know that we're downtown playing at that moment. And I think that that makes it special. And there's a chat feed and people interact, and you can wear sweatpants to watch it, and not, and put your feet up and order pizza and eat it during the concert. um, People are going to get spoiled. Like the audience is really, really, actually. And the other thing is like my parents who live in Pennsylvania can watch my concerts, and they don't normally come to every concert. So like there's certain things that are like we try to see the silver lining in it, but mostly we want it to get back to what it is. But in the meantime, we want to stay relevant, and we want to stay um, want to keep the orchestra playing, want to keep the musicians being paid, and want to keep that connection from eroding between the audience, the community, and the orchestra, because it takes a long time to build that trust, and it can evaporate very quickly if you just disappear for a year. So that's what we've been doing in Syracuse. We just adjusted the whole season, but we're doing big pieces there. I mean, we're doing Dvorak 7 this week.
Wow.
That's a pretty big. The only thing that's different is that the string count is smaller. Normally we have 8 firsts on down to like 3 basses, and then for these Masterworks concerts, we do 8 of these. We hire in a couple stands extra for each concert, so it's a like normal size, and then for these concerts, we don't do that, which is really unfortunate for us because it just feels different.
Mhm.
But that's all we can are all we're allowed to fit.
Right. So how does two things in follow up to that is one the vinyl shields, the social distancing, because the sound is totally different, isn't it?
Yeah,
How do you adjust to that? Because I think that aspects of playing in an ensemble together, we are trained to have a certain way of responding to sound, but that is now
yeah,
completely foreign.
totally. Well, so I mean, just to like compare, and I've only conducted 2. I'm going to conduct Dallas Symphony next week, and then go to West Virginia right afterwards. And both of them are going to be like physically very spread apart. Um, and that's the way Buffalo was when I was there. When you do it that way, and like the trumpet is a mile away, singular trumpet, because that's what we had for this. That one trumpet had to play everything early, like
Wow.
much earlier than normal.
Yeah.
And in order for them to hear me, and they didn't even have shields in front of them, they just had them between them.
Mm.
So like I wasn't looking through anything to see them, but I had to use a microphone so that everyone could hear me.
Wow.
And so I've conducted that orchestra before, and I remember feeling like they already drag from the back, like it's just
Hmm.
a weird orchestra in that way.
Hmm.
Uh, and I knew it was going to be a problem for this recent concert, and it was much worse.
Yeah.
So I literally would have to say like, you have to play earlier in the back. You have to like drive it from the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in Syracuse, I got them to a place like at the end of last season. I've been here about 4 or 5 seasons. I've gotten them to a place where they really play the way that I like the
Mm.
back, just like I
Yeah.
love to engage the back of the orchestra. I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
that's like the key to getting excitement. And when you are further apart and there's shields like in every direction around you, you're like isolated completely in every
Yeah.
direction. So
Yeah.
there are some people you're looking through warped, pretty clear vinyl. And like if I want to look at the principal horn, I have to look through like 4 layers of that, because I'm going through like the back of the violins, and then the back of the oboe,
Oh my
and then the
God.
back of the bassoon, and then there she is. And I can kind of see her. So like I'm kind of doing this thing, and it's really challenging. They cannot rely on what they hear. and they have to play early, and I literally have to say, like, I come like I'm not like usually drenched after rehearsal.
Mm.
I mean, unless I'm really stressed out or like I'm working really hard. And every rehearsal in Syracuse, I'm like drip, like it's just awful. Like I
Yeah.
just feel like, why am I working so hard? Oh, it's because I'm physically just moving in a way that's like unnatural. Like I probably look like, I don't know what I look like, but yeah, everyone who's live streaming can see. But it's a challenge because I have to conduct in an amplified way, and I have to like hand pick every moment and say, for this thing, play that note earlier, and then they have to remember that or mark it, and then I have to hope at the concert that they will just simply throw that that measure earlier in order to be together. And it used to just take a signal. I would just look at them and just go, I do like this little gesture, and they knew exactly what it meant. And it has much less effect now. So that part is really challenging. And I'm sure when you all get back together for the first time, it will be at a distance, and then hopefully like moving together
Yeah.
again. And those first couple of concerts will be and rehearsals will just be very, very weird.
Yeah.
And it's I thought, it's funny because I hadn't stood in front of an orchestra from late February until September,
Hmm.
late September, early October,
Yeah.
and I thought I would be all emotional, like I would get in front of them and be like, "It's been, this many months," and just to hear the sound of the egg, like I just wanted to like, I wanted to have that, and instead I was just like working my butt off trying to get it to like anything
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
like resemble normal ensemble music making. Um, each time we get back together, so this will be for me my fourth time coming together with the orchestra. That first rehearsal gets a little better,
Hmm.
but it's the increments are much smaller than I would want.
Yeah.
And if you start at a lower level, you end not quite exactly where you want. I think we've been doing pretty well, but I know it could be better if we didn't have all these restrictions. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we're dealing with it okay, and I think the product that people are getting at home is pretty great. So hopefully, we're not getting complaints.
Yeah. So Rachel has her hand raised, so let's have
Oh
Rachel
yeah.
ask a question.
So you mentioned how, people are kind of waiting for things to get back to normal. But do you kind of foresee the live stream still being a part of your orchestras when, or like if or when this pandemic is over? Because I know personally, the Houston, for example, Houston, it takes over an hour to travel there. So it's been, I mean, the sound is definitely different, but it's been convenient for me to have that live stream. So just wondering
So
what you.
where were you talking about? It kind of went out for a second.
Oh, I
Hour
was
away.
in or near Houston, so it's like over an hour for me to get to the Houston Symphony. So to have that live stream is really convenient, even though the sound is different, at least for me.
Right.
So wondering what
Yeah.
you.
No, I think that's a great question. What we've been saying is, oh, this pandemic, we're learning to adapt, and we're changing a lot of things, and we might be actually learning like a new way to present music to people because we don't know, like we wouldn't have thought of live streaming if it hadn't been for this. We wouldn't, in Syracuse, we wouldn't have thought of this whole like I used to go up half an hour before an hour before the concert and talk for half an hour, do a pre-concert lecture. And then we would do the concert. At intermission, people go to the restroom, get their wine, and they come back in, and then they'd go home, and there might be a little socializing. And now people have this experience of like, we have a series of videos at the beginning that are all like pre-recorded, but they're all made for that concert. So it's this fresh material, and the entire intermission is like this B-roll of, we're going to have this interview, we're going to get to know the soloist, we're going to get to talk to this sponsor, and it's been so fun to make this a little bit different. And there are definitely people, like I have a friend here, like I've known her for 20 years, and she would go to like one concert a year, normally, and she's gone to every concert by live stream because she has kids at home. She's a teacher. She doesn't have the time every weekend, like on her one free night or two free nights a week, that she would go like to a concert. Instead, she can like make dinner up until the last second and then watch the concert and maybe eat dinner while she's watching the concert. And yeah, I think that's a great comment because I think it will be. I think people are going to really like having that as an option, and I think we have to consider that. There is a lot that goes into making these live streams because, like in Syracuse, I know in like Buffalo, we had 7 cameras. Uh, four, 4 or 5 of them were robotic, but they were still, being manipulated, and 2 were like on people, and they were moving around.
Mm.
And then in Buffalo, it wasn't live streamed, so they would cut, and it would take them like 4 days to create a final edition of that concert, and then they would live stream it for 30 days. That's how they do it.
Mhm.
In Syracuse, we have 5 cameras, all fixed, but you can manipulate them by robotics. And a person goes through a score and marks all the cut, all the like, we're going to cut to this camera for this, we're going to go to the horns for this, and then that person does it live during the live stream.
Mhm.
So there's definitely a lot that goes into that, and whether or not that's worth it for every orchestra, I think remains to be seen. And I know in Syracuse, the challenge that we will have is that our normal hall doesn't have this built-in camera system, but the hall that we're playing in now, which only seats like 200 people,
Mm.
has that all built in, and that's why we're doing them at this particular hall. Like
Yeah.
it would be a terrible place for our normally like 1,200 people.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so I think that's going to be a challenge. We'll have to implement a whole new system, and it's a union hall, so I'm sure that's going to be an extra like giant expense for the orchestra.
Mhm.
And we just have to like, is a fixed camera going to be the same experience, a single fixed camera that takes a lot less, I guess, labor?
Right.
Who knows? But I think it's something we have to consider, and I think something that many orchestras will start doing. And I'll just add that orchestras, like, you kind of have to go through a crisis to figure out like these new paths. And one of the most notable orchestras that went through this is Detroit. So Detroit went bankrupt. I can't remember the exact year, but I conducted them before and after this happened. Before the bankruptcy, the orchestra was like any other great big orchestra. And afterwards, they would live stream and then leave on YouTube this DSO live. I think every major performance, and you can still go online and see them now. Anyone can see them. Their goal is to be the most accessible orchestra on the planet,
Mhm.
and they're really doing it.
Yeah.
And they play out in the neighborhoods in these small orchestra groups, and they've totally changed. Their attitude is very different. They take nothing for granted, and they do this well, it's not live streaming, although actually the initial concert is live streamed. But they do this thing, this online thing, and they decided that it's worth the investment. And now it's something that the orchestra is known for, and it makes them stand out amongst Dallas, Seattle, all these other orchestras that are roughly the same budget size, because they just do so much of this stuff online that just brings it to such a wide audience.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love that question. I think that's really astute, and it's something that we're all going to have to think about, and our audience will probably expect it.
Yeah, I think even when the Berlin Philharmonic, at the suggestion of 2 of the musicians who said, we should really do a digital concert, and I think initially the Berlin Philharmonic said, we don't want it to draw audience away from our regular series in the Philharmonie. So initially there was resistance to that idea of making the concerts available in a digital format. And this is well before the pandemic. But of course now the digital concert hall is such a big moneymaker. One, it provides an additional source of income for the orchestra, and it's being streamed to all over internationally, right? So that it is not sort of, I think there came up a certain point, like year 3 or 4, when they're doing it, where it all the cameras, the high definition 8K cameras that they put in, initially the orchestra just balked at the expense of this thing. But it was like year three where it was like budget wise even. And then from that point on, it was a moneymaker for the orchestra. So that
Yeah.
all the naysayers are like, oh, I guess you guys are right. And then of
Yeah.
course, whenever they go to Taiwan or Japan, there is such a huge audience that they've gotten to know, and not just the older folks, but the younger generation who've only gotten to know in Berlin Philharmonic through the digital concert hall medium, that they would just sell out the international tours in those Far East cities. So you are absolutely right. I think sometimes the crisis, and the original Greek word crisis is a path, right? It's you're making a choice, right? So I think sometimes a crisis allows an orchestra or a big organization to look at things and redefine, and what are we doing? How are we doing things? So it's true. I still have people telling me we are worried about this time where all these concerts are available for free online. Everybody gets used to watching orchestra concerts on YouTube. So then when we get back to normal operation, nobody will want to hire a babysitter and come to a live hall. But I think that is being short-sighted, because you are able to access a whole new set of audiences that maybe weren't able to come because they couldn't find childcare, or maybe because it was too complicated to
or an hour away drive. Yeah,
exactly right. And I want to follow up on one more, and we have Rehan who's raised his hand, so when we get to his question, but when you mentioned Syracuse having a salaried position musicians, allowing you more flexibility in terms of septet versus a Dvorak 7, I think that was in a way Boulez's dream when he was the music director of New York Philharmonic for those short 5 years, where he tried all different kinds of formats, and I think in the end it's considered a failure, because he brought ideas that were too far ahead of time. He organized all kinds of. I even read about a concert where he turned the hall with chairs, and the orchestra in the middle. So he had set up like pillows, and people could sit around the orchestra. But I think that was too much for the blue-haired ladies who pay subscription. But I always find, in a way, the way to make orchestral musicians season more interesting is to actually give them much more format and different ways of presenting music, right? So it would be, for me as a musician, I would much rather play a septet one week, Dvorak 7 next week, John Williams the next week, so have all kinds of array of diverse musical experiences.
Yeah, I mean, just real briefly, the Syracuse Symphony is basically the orchestra that I conduct. So that orchestra is a great orchestra, has an amazing history. Went bankrupt in 2012. The musicians formed this new thing, clean slate. They decided to experiment with all kinds of formats. So we have like our main classical series of 8 concerts. We have a casual classics in a different venue, which is always narrated, that I'm like a host, as well as a conductor. We have a Spark series, which is always in some weird place, like the fairground, New York State Fairground, or like at a museum, or in some like coffee shop or whatever. So like there are all these things that we're doing that are like experimental in that way. And then we have our regular pop series. And it had started with the crisis and not knowing exactly how we wanted to be different. And we just kind of cleared the board and just set it up differently, the way, with just whatever idea we wanted to. Rehan, go ahead.
My question to you would be, because you conduct so many places, I know you said that there are some places where you're more nervous and less nervous and whatnot. Would you be able to elaborate more about where you're more nervous and why you'd be more? Is there like some orchestras here that are more bigger or more prestigious, or is it just like a crowd thing? I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if I'm nervous, well, first of all, I never think that I know it well enough. No matter how much you study something, no matter how many times you've conducted it, you never feel like you know. You never get to it. You shouldn't, at least. I think you're being naive if you think, "Oh, I know it. I know Beethoven 3. I've conducted, like I've conducted Beethoven 3. I don't know how many times, maybe 15 times in my life. I don't feel like I'm like the expert on it. I know I have an approach to it, but it's evolving still, and I still feel like I'm learning things. And so even a piece like that, there'll be some bit of me that feels a little bit like, like where I'm nervous about some aspect of it. And nervousness for a conductor that's a killer. That's something we have to contend with, something we have to deal with, channel in a certain way or whatever. And because orchestra players, you can tell if a conductor is nervous. I'm not saying, that Chris Kim is nervous when he gets up there, but I'm sure you've been in an orchestra where you looked up and you thought that person is scared. That person does not know what they want. And because I've seen that so many times, I never want to be that. And probably because I'm so self-aware and because I've seen it, I have this like part of me that's worried that I'll be like that. But like in terms of like a certain situation or certain orchestra, I think the first time I conduct an orchestra that's like very famous orchestra, like a couple years ago, first time I had a whole slew of new orchestras like Seattle, San Diego, Utah, Boston Pops, all like kind of within 2 years. And I was pretty excited about it, but definitely nervous for that first interaction. Like when you first walk up there and how are they going to sound? And like my greatest fear, to be honest, is like I get in front of an orchestra, like Buffalo Philharmonic, just down the road from me, but I don't, I know like two people in that orchestra. And it's Dvorak 9, a piece that they've all played a billion times. And I'm afraid it's going to be perfect. Like I'm afraid I'm going to go up there and it's going to be just perfect, and then I won't know what to do. And of course, that never happens. Like it's always like 1,000 things that I want different. But the nervousness is that, oh, they're going to be just so amazing, and I'm just not going to know what to do, and then I'm just going to crumble, like and collapse in like a pile of skin. And so I think that that's like something that makes me nervous. If a piece is like, oh, I think if there's certain repertoire that's harder for me than others, where I'll feel maybe a little less secure, or maybe like, okay, I think actually the most nervous I get is like when I've been assistant conductor and it's a really important concert to me. So like with Pittsburgh, I remember doing the first time I did like an all John Williams concert or something. And when I did that, I remember thinking like, I really want this to be the best because I just love this music so much. And I felt nervous going into that first rehearsal, thinking that like I just wasn't going to be good enough. And that's usually what makes me personally nervous. But thankfully, most of the places where I've been, I always leave that first rehearsal really excited, and then I look forward to the next time, and then the next rehearsal will be way less nervous. So it's that first interaction, you just don't know what you're going to get. And for me, like any kind of sweating or any nervous, like I don't get shaky. I just get like where I get really hot and feel insecure. So like when that happens, I can tell like my level of confidence by that. It's like a gauge. It's like perfectly indicative of whatever my level of confidence is. And if I'm calm, cool, and collected at the end, I was like so confident the whole time. And if I wasn't, I know why. And it's usually not because I feel like I didn't study enough. It's usually just I don't have enough confidence or whatever.
Yeah, I remember my audition for University of Michigan for for some stupid reason, I had like a thick sweater on for my audition with the orchestra.
Oh yeah.
And of course, I'm, same way. I'm like sweat a ton if I'm like stressed out or nervous. And of course, like I conducted Petrushka, and then I sort of stepped off while they're changing seats, and I'm like sweating bullets, and sort of
So
I
embarrassing.
yeah, so I'm just like, all right. So the
Like
concert master is kind of
splashing
looking at me
fires.
like sweating. I'm like, kind of hot in here. And he's like, not
And you're
really.
like, no, it's 60 degrees. Anyone else hot? Oh gosh.
All right. So I think I would love to share some of the programs our students have come up
Yeah.
with the Imaginary Ithaca Orchestra. So I'm going to share the screen. And so what I'll do is I'll go to this first program, and then maybe Peter, why don't you? Is there a particular program you want to highlight and talk us through?
Sure, I can bring you through the first concert that was there. I was really thinking that we've had a significant like a new wave in this understanding of like the Black Lives Matter movement that really spiked in 2020. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, even in our COVID times, was bringing some more of those composers that don't get featured as often, and have a concert that only features those composers. I am very much coming from a band, like a concert band kind of perspective. So in terms of any sort of particular order of like symphony versus overture versus any of those, concerto, exactly. I tried to see if there was some way that would kind of incorporate what I was used to from a concert band perspective into a orchestral concert. And the way I thought of doing that was we started with this more kind of a classical suite by Fela Sowand. I apologize profusely if I butcher names. And then after concluding that, having a much shorter piece that kind of acts as not as an interlude because it significantly stands on its own, but one that features a very different style, the Ellington in this case. Mm-hmm. And then after that more jazzier piece of that kind of arranged for orchestra, going into a much more modern piece. So kind of having that kind of timeline progression, style progression going through the three pieces.
Yeah. Is this like a non-intermission, straight through, play about an hour?
Yes, a non-intermission. However, most likely, given that most of the concertgoers will not be familiar with these pieces, probably like a little bit of an introduction to the composer and the piece. But yes, no kind of big intermission. I believe the time was 45 minutes we were supposed to bring it around. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. I'll go to
that's good.
The next program. Rehan, is there a particular program you want to talk about?
Oh yeah, sure. So this is my program. I haven't put intervals in, I guess, because I guess I just wanted to, I didn't realize we were doing intervals as well. But yeah, so a lot of my programs kind of required a lot of external players. So I come from Mumbai, where back home everyone puts their programs into like a certain theme and they give it a title to kind of attract people. So some of the themes I chose were kind of one opera theme, where like it's a kind of, you take a bunch of famous operas and you kind of arrange them for orchestra and you have a couple singers do them. And another theme I had was unrepresented composers, because we've been studying that so much this semester, both with Chris and my piano teacher. So I chose a Florence Price piece and a Carlos Simon piece and a Jesse Montgomery piece. And what I like kind of enjoyed about this program is that there are a lot of other players you wouldn't usually see. So, you need contrabassoon players and English horn players, celeste players and harp players. And so I really tried not to restrict myself just to the basic orchestra, especially because for this program assignment, we were given a larger budget. So I tried to incorporate as many players and singers as I could. Another thing that I tried to incorporate in this program was 250 years of Beethoven at the start because this year is actually the 250th birthday anniversary of Beethoven, but because of COVID, we wouldn't be able to do it. So kind of like the Olympics, I thought just postpone that to next year and play two of his really famous symphonies. And those two went together well. I saw that in another program as well. And finally, to my last masterwork concert would kind of be selecting, it would give people, college students here, a chance to kind of perform professionally. And so I chose like three concertos, but the soloists would be selected from either Cornell or Ithaca College, and that would give them like an opportunity to perform with a semi-professional orchestra.
I like it. It's funny, you know, I always think about, I think the order of programs is really important for pacing. So like if you look at the Beethoven, I just found it curious that you had the 5 and 6 in that order. I would probably have reversed it, but just because 5 is such a huge, you know,
Yeah.
you don't want anyone to leave after the 5th. They might.
Right.
And then, and by the way, doing that kind of program, Beethoven 5 and 6, just in my experience, I think that people in the orchestra, the reason that they like having a concerto is that there's at least a little part of the program where they're slightly less
Intense.
in the foreground. Yeah, intense. Because I did once, I did Schumann to Beethoven 5.
Wow.
And they were just dead at the end. And it was a great orchestra. They were just dead. And I was like, well, I'm never going to do that again. But, you know, for me and for the audience, it was awesome. So, you know, it depends on the orchestra. If they can handle it, sure. And orchestras do play two big pieces like that. Like I remember Dallas Symphony, we went to Carnegie Hall and we did Also Sprach Zarathustra first half, Carmina Burana second half. And even though Carmina Burana is like way easier for the orchestra to play, it's still pretty intense and it's loud. And
Right.
so that was kind of crazy, you know, to do that. And then looking at the concerto competition one where it was Emperor first movement, and then the Copland, and then the Shostakovich. Actually, I kind of like this order is good because like the Beethoven's a really grand opener. It's a great way to open a program. The Copland is kind of this quirky little funny piece.
Yeah,
it's definitely a good middle piece. And the Shostakovich first cello concerto is just fantastic all the way through. And you know, just if you can get someone to play that really well, that I really like that. I was thinking like, would I want to switch that? But you know, I think the Shostakovich is really special, and people who love music will really look forward to that being the last thing. And people definitely leave feeling like that had a huge impact on me. So good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would also add two more comments. I think Larry's absolutely right. When you have two sort of really big pieces, it's really tiring for the orchestra. So I think, and especially concerts that it's like an all Beethoven or Brahms. That's not particularly my cup of tea because I like more variety. I think it can work if you select pieces from a composer that are so different and so contrasting. Then it can work to have like a single composer
which those are, you know,
yeah,
like
those are
5 and 6, even though they're like written very close together, like those two couldn't be any more different.
Right.
So, you know,
in fact, the premiere had both pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I guess there's a precedent.
Okay, let me go to another program. Here's Rachel's. Rachel, is there a particular one you want to talk about?
I really enjoyed doing the young people's concert actually.
Okay, so I'll jump over to the young people's concert. Here we go.
Okay, so I guess this was a COVID era basically kind of program. So I tried to use as little winds and RAS as possible. And I programmed the Penderecki first just because it's a really, I don't know, I feel like when I was younger and orchestras came to my school to kind of play and they played pieces that were out there, I felt really interested. So I programmed that first, and then the soloist piece, the Vaughan Williams Lark Ascending, I programmed because, again, when I was little and I was listening to orchestras come to my school, whenever, especially I play violin, so whenever they had like a violin solo, my attention would always go to them, and so I would always get really excited. So I programmed Vaughan Williams next, and then I programmed the last one, just kind of a more traditional orchestral piece, Bartok Divertimento. Yeah, and all those scores were available online for rental availability. So I made sure to make sure of that.
Probably the Bartok and the Penderecki are rental, like where you have to pay, but that's okay. I mean, I don't know what the budget.
Yeah, the Bartok and quite expensive.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I love that program. I think I would be really interested in that. Traditionally, orchestras will do shorter pieces for kids depending on the age. So I think if you have like a high school audience, maybe middle school audience, they could handle that length. Definitely fourth grade or younger, you're going to want to break things up. And if you did Lark Ascending as like the longest piece in the middle of the program, I think that could work. But sometimes if you do end up putting together programs, you just kind of have to think about what are the concepts that age is, like what are they grappling with? So if they are preschool, it might be like loud and soft, fast or slow. Like it might be as basic as that. Or like instrument families. And finding some ways to organize those pieces where you have ways that you can get them through a narrative and connect the pieces and introduce some basic elements and then reinforce them through the program. I found that that's kind of a better way to approach the very young audience. But I don't know what, like age, like if I was a kid, I would love to see that program. Like I know I had the attention span at the time because I grew up around music. And I love the out there attitude also. I think that that's something that classical musicians are generally afraid of, out there music, because we're worried that people aren't going to like it or they won't be interested in it. But in reality, like to hear another Rossini overture might not be interesting to the average concert goer because it's like, well, I've already heard, I know that one, and I want to hear something different. I want to hear something that disturbs me, like for me to have a like extreme negative reaction to music, I don't think of that as a bad thing. I think of that as like it had an effect on me. And the general attitude of most Americans at classical concerts is insecurity and not knowing if I'm supposed to like it. And I guess I'm supposed to like it. And then the same person goes to a movie and they're like, oh, it's terrible. Do you see the way that like that person was overacting the whole time, or like, why was that even happening? And that plot twist at the end doesn't make any sense to me. And those are the kinds of attitudes that like I would welcome at a classical concert. Like, what kind of opening is that to, Bruckner's Seventh Symphony? Or like, why did that middle part drag on so long and nothing happened? Those are the kinds of things that people should be not afraid to express that. And that's a tangent, but it made me think like, if you're going to take a risk in the program, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I would also add that it really depends on in terms of young person's concert, what the age group that you're really focusing on, right? So you have to have a different set of mind for under 8 or betweeners like 11, 12, 13, and then 14, 15 it's a whole different ballgame. But one of the things that I think two of the things I try to ascribe to is actually young people are more open to contemporary music. than older audiences. So I think it's absolutely great to have a challenge young people, as Bernstein did all the time with something like Penderecki. But you have to kind of guide it well. I've done a concert for a bunch of fourth graders, and we did Shostakovich Chamber Symphony. But I set it up with talking about emotions and what Shostakovich went through. So I painted a context of how somebody might express their emotions. So I related to that. And the comments I got after I did the Shostakovich was all the teachers and parents saying, I know my fourth grader, and I looked at your piece, which is a 20-minute heavy symphony, and I'm thinking, what is this guy doing? But the way I had set it up was that I gave them enough guide points for them to hang on to, right? So in that sense, like I had parents and teachers saying, I've never seen our students pay attention like that for a prolonged 20-minute period. So it's a matter of how you set it up. If you're going to do a prolonged long piece in a young person's concert, I don't think I would do 3 20-minute pieces. I think that's too much for any kid to handle. But I think you could have like short pieces, and then there's sort of a longish thing that you set up well. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to like just take a movement and just do one little section if it serves whatever your narrative is. I really like the idea of finding whatever the theme is that you're trying to teach or organize under, and then finding pieces that work with that theme, and so that there's a very clear arc to the program, and it helps the kids stay engaged, and it helps them think. And especially for a novice who's listening, they need things to hold on to. They need, because if it's just like music, then they might not, like, they need some external guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be, all these pieces were composed in a foreign country, mm-hmm. from their home. And then you have like your Dvorak or whatever. And those types of programs, then you can have this narrative, and the kid can relate to that aspect of whatever you're trying to convey, and then you can really virtually program whatever you want if it fits into that. But yeah, anyway.
All right, let's go to another program. EJ is not here, but here are the sets of programs. Are there anyone that sort of strikes out at you, Larry?
First one looks like a program I would do. Small orchestra. I think that would be interesting too. These are very traditionally organized programs. Mm-hmm. The Webern Bach, I love that. The fourth piano concerto Rachmaninoff is an interesting choice because that's not very often done.
Right.
The Enigma Variation is one of my favorite pieces. Second concert, it's tough to start a concert with Barber Adagio. People might like immediately feel depressed. I would probably reverse and just put the Vivaldi first.
Yeah.
And then do the Barber, and then go to intermission, and then do the Mahler. And I've not heard. Isn't there a Schoenberg also for the Mahler? Or is that it?
No, there's the Webern arrangement of the Mahler, and then there's also there's a Korean conductor in New York who's done a arrangement of it. So I think there's like 3 or 4 versions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then going through the avant-garde one, that could be interesting. Verklärte, that's such a weird piece.
Yeah.
And then let me look at that last one. Is this bigger? So, like, to me, this seems like a lot, even though the Sibelius is only one movement. It's still kind of heavy.
Yeah.
The Brahms Alto Rhapsody is beautiful. Ravel is a great way to open. I feel like it kind of goes downhill a little bit. Like from the beginning, it starts off kind of, and then it just kind of like the Copland. It's one of the first pieces I conducted, probably yours too, Chris.
Yeah.
The 13 instrument version. It's like the lab piece for every conductor. Yeah. It's such a beautiful piece. I'm assuming that's the full orchestra version since you have the musicians for it. I would just have a hard time going from the Copland to the Sibelius.
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a I'm also I conduct a lot of Sibelius, but I'm not a huge Sibelius fan. Like I just don't go crazy for it except the violin concerto. I think that's like genius, and then everything else it's okay.
Yeah.
So, and the Seventh Symphony, his final work is just, I don't know, not a great way to end the program to me, but interesting pieces. Yeah, and then the Young People's Concert, that's a lot of really hard music.
Yeah.
Till Eulenspiegel is really hard. Like
Yeah.
you get usually one rehearsal for a Young People's Concert if you were to do this with a professional orchestra.
Yeah.
And then if like this would be like enough for a whole semester with a really great university orchestra. And I think they would love playing it. I would probably put the Young Person's Guide at the end because the ending is so great. But I love, like I think you could do a lot with characters in this, with the Strauss and the Mozart. The Young Person's Guide, you could argue that the musicians themselves are characters, and then the Adams maybe is like, I don't know, robot. But that one could be like, maybe that one's the first piece, get people like really into it, and it's so weird with the wood block, and it's a satisfying piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the mistakes I earlier made in terms of programming was sort of packing it with too many.
Your dream pieces.
Right. So my wish list, like 1, 2, 3 is in there, right? So.
I know, like that. I did that. Like I was like, I'm going to do Candide Overture. I'm going to put Appalachian Spring on it, and then we're going to do the Enigma Variations, and then the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto with my best friend. Like all of the things that I wanted in one program that I have no rehearsal for. So
like somebody always makes analogies to like preparing a meal, right? So like I think that Young People's Concert program is sort of like there's like a cheesecake for appetizer, and then chocolate cake for salad, and then another tiramisu. So it's just like way too much of one kind. So like
Yep. No, it's a perfect analogy. Like you don't want to eat the same thing 4 times or the same kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Okay. I think Amy's is our last one to look at.
Okay.
So Amy, is there a particular program you want to highlight?
I guess number 4, Masterworks Concert number 4.
Okay.
Yeah, so for this one, I was trying to go a little more modern. Like these are all pieces written in the 2000s. The last 2, Let Me Tell You and Become Ocean, are like 2013. And all of these pieces are pretty like dreamlike, pretty ambient. And normally I feel like a lot of orchestra pieces, well, they might be like ambient or calm for a period of time, but then like a lot of technique kicks in. And I just wanted to go with something a little more, I don't know, chill. So On the Nature of Daylight is like, I don't know, pretty much used a lot in cinema. And I know that you have a lot of experience conducting in film music. And I just thought it would be a kind of a good starter because it's pretty ambient. And I think Max Richter wrote it in 2004 in response to like the Iraq War, which is kind of cool because it really doesn't sound violent at all. It sounds like the complete opposite of that, which was his response to that, I guess. And then Let Me Tell You is based on a novel, like a contemporary version of Hamlet, but from Ophelia's point of view. And so it's with soprano and orchestra. And I thought that was a really cool reimagination of Shakespeare. And then Become Ocean, again, it's really ambient. It's just like how it feels to be an ocean. And I just thought that was a really cool idea. And I guess the whole theme is just modern pieces that are cool and different and pretty chill.
So the first 2 pieces I don't know. The last one I've heard, not conducted any of this music. I do like the idea of like the imagery that you were saying, and yeah, and I've done a lot of these programs like Conduct Empire Strikes Back, the whole soundtrack with the film, with the music extracted from it, and it's an amazing experience to have the music be more the centerpiece of the experience. And I was kind of imagining, especially I think with Seattle, I think it was them who premiered that John Luther Adams.
Yeah.
I think that they had slides or had film or something. It's possible, maybe not. I don't know, but I guess I could imagine it with that. I think the only thing I'd be careful of with that program is if it is all chill and all kind of the same, would that get? Because I think that become Ocean, to take that in, it's a relatively long piece. If the rest of the program is like that, it might be for maybe not for you, but for some, too much of the same kind of music. And it could be a little bit like every single chorus is sort of the same kind of palette, but I don't know if they are, because I don't know the first two pieces. But I guess I would just take that in consideration. And if you have to make an adjustment, maybe it would be the middle piece so that there is some contrast. And you could definitely take a thread from the idea of calmness, but find something that's like a different kind of calm, maybe like with like perpetual motion calm, where like there's like a very similar kind of pulse that goes through something the entire way through, or just at least something, or different time period. Yeah, certainly. Like, oh, they were actually doing this back, in Mozart's time, and then to find a piece that has like a similar vibe, but that has a very different kind of sound. I think that would help the program. That would be definitely what I would wonder about if I saw that program on a season. But yeah, these are all great. And Peter, I'm sorry, I don't know as much of the repertoire that you put up, except the Ellington. I didn't give as many comments for yours, but I appreciate the band perspective too, because like that, since I play clarinet, I started in that, and so for me that was like, I knew all like the whole military suites, like that was my, and like I thought the 1812 overture was scored for like wind ensemble. Like the fact that strings playing that too, like I didn't. No, that's a brass chorale, and then the clarinets play it too. Like I didn't.
It's more brass and canon too.
Yeah. So like I think that a lot of that perspective I can appreciate, and I've just lived in the symphony world for so long now that that's kind of become where I live. But I started also in the band wind ensemble world.
So I can't believe our time has already run out. So Larry, thank you so much for sharing your insight and wisdom and going through our students' programs and giving them feedback. I had a lot of fun getting to know you better and having this forum to talk about this issue of how to respond to the time of pandemic. So thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
Hope you have a great year.
Thank you.
Thank you.